Hey guys, welcome to week 2, and we are going to start with, sort of jump straight in basically with working on the brick substance that I've sort of got here in the viewport. So you can see, obviously, this is the kind of finished material that you're going to sort of aim for. So we'll sort of cover how to kind of, in this week at least, we'll cover just how to do the height map and how to do a normal map, how to set that all up, and get everything looking good before we add all the diffuse colouring and the roughness and everything to that itself. So so I'm just going to jump straight into that, so let's just get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this. So substance is running a bit better, but I'm just going to make a new substance, and I'm just going to call that CGMA brick, and then I'm going to leave all the settings the same as before, so we'll just hit OK on that, and then we'll save that in the same folder as before, just so that we've got, like, just because you want to make sure that you save. I mean, substance, for me at least, is very like reliable basically, but it's when sort of like various computers, like some computers seem to be like really reliable and like hardly any crashes, and then others just, I don't know, they just seem to be like they crash a lot. So I don't know, it might not be substance necessarily, but just to be better, just to be on the safe side basically, always make sure you're saving. So so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to rearrange the viewports a bit so I can see what's going on. So as we showed before, I'm going to hit space, and I'm going to get the base material, because that's going to help me out basically to see what's going on. So I'm going to turn that down to just plain grey material basically for now. And then, because I want to be looking at this with a bit of parallax, like you can see in the other one I had a bit of parallax, so what I want to do is add a height output to this. So I'm just going to take the output, the metallic one, and Control-C, Control-V, copy that, and I'm going to change this to height. I'm just going to copy that across to the label as well. And then in here I'm going to choose height map, so that when I right click in and apply, so if I do that, if I right click and hit view outputs in 3D now, whenever I've got a height map channel, whatever's going to go in there is going to offset the parallax basically. So that's kind of my general workflow. I normally get this all set up first and then I start. So in here I'm going to choose the user defined maps. I'm going to choose height map. So whatever I plug into here is going to give me a height map, and then I'm going to also get a normal map from that. So that's a really super quick way of getting your sort of material preview set up, and I normally use this rounded cube as well to sort of view my materials on. So the first thing we're going to start with is getting a general kind of a shape for the brick. So there's a node in here called polygon, so just polygon 1, and what this allows you to do is you get, you see in the 2D view, you've got a shape. You can change the amount, like you can use this for a lot of things. It's really good for making rocks and various things like that. You can change the amount of sides, so if you dial the sides up you'll get more like a circle, close to a circle basically. So I'm just going to stick with a square, and if you can explode that as well, so it kind of comes out from the point, and it works the same with, it's basically just like a polygon, it's like triangles. And then you can change the scale, and you can add gradients and things like that to it, and the amount there is, like tiling and things like that. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to then, so you obviously got blur here. I'm going to use a slightly different one. So there's a high quality version. If you type in blur, you've got HQ, which just basically means that you're not going to get as much like banding. So I'm just going to dial that up until I've got like quite a nice soft. And you can go, actually what's quite interesting is I've got this intensity. You can change the quality as well. If I go like really high, I can actually increase that number beyond its limit, so I can go say 32 for example, even though that only went up to 16. And so that's quite good. You can just sort of tweak until you're happy. So I'm just going to go for something like 25, I think. And then I'm going to choose levels, plug that in. So what I'm actually just trying to aim to do at this stage is I'm just building up like a basic kind of sort of like rounded shape. So I want something that's like going to be like, I can use as like a shape that's going to give me sort of like these rounded corners. You can see by leveling that I'm already sort of kind of starting to get that. So yeah, and then what I also want to do is add a gradient to that. So if I add a gradient, that's what's going to happen with that is I'm going to get sort of like variation in my bricks, because I'm gonna be adding like the sort of gradient to at various sort of levels, and then I'm going to rotate those bricks so that the bricks end up like with different kind of levels on them. So you can get a gradient very simply by just typing in gradient. So I'm going to choose this linear one, and then so this is all like kind of very simple stuff. So then one of the main nodes that you'll find you'll use is blend, and the way that works is like it's like you can mask together two things. So if I add these two things together, I can use the blending mode, so like the same as you do in Photoshop. So like if I use multiply, you're going to get a gradient over the top, and then there's a slider here to control the opacity. If I just switch those round, that will work better. But so there's X is a shortcut for sort of, if you select those two, you can switch them, or you could have just replugged them in. But because this one, so you've got a foreground and a background, so you want this one to be on top of this as the background, and then that will multiply over the top, whereas before I had it the other way around, so this was, the white thing was multiplying over top of the gradient. So we want to just switch that basically, and then you're getting the gradient just coming through on that shape then. So yeah, that's like to set up a very general just like brick shape. So now, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and keep this graph like very organized. So if I select these nodes, what you can do is you can kind of group them together. So in here there is you can add a frame. So if you add a frame, that will select, like with those things selected, that will add a frame around those things, and you can drag that frame with all the nodes in. So that's a good way to keep yourself like organized. You can also change the name, so I'm just going to call this like initial shape, and then I can drag this thing around. I can also change the color, so if I wanted to make it like really obvious like what that actually is, it's a bit easier to see, like, okay, that's the shape, because it's like everything I make in this graph is going to be green if that's the starting point, whatever. So now I'm going to have a look at basically moving on to how this initial brick shape is going to be distributed across like a pattern basically. And if you have a look in the library, you've got generators, which is noises, which I kind of sort of explained in the last video. They're kind of just like your general Photoshop kind of noises. The grunges, so anything that says grunge, like grunge 01, they're kind of made from these things. So what I tend to do is try to avoid those, because they're quite expensive like nodes, and they don't, you can kind of make your own versions of them anyway, so it doesn't really benefit me much to use those. So I tend to stick to these main ones because they're quite cheap, and some of the ones at the bottom, like the Perlin noises and stuff. They're quite cheap, and also you can make your own version. So it's just like when you're trying to work on like something and you've got a really complicated graph, if you start using lots of grunges, like they are really nice sort of, like noises, but they are expensive, so you just have to be a bit wary of that. Like if you are going to use them, just be careful like how you are using them and like what you're using them for and stuff, I guess. So yeah, so now we're going to just like have a look at the patterns. So that noises, obviously we just explained. Patterns are kind of how you distribute like a shape. So obviously I've made this kind of shape here. There's various ones, like you can see there's bricks and checkerboards and patterns, different patterns basically that you'd use to make stuff. So you can see there's some fabric ones and things like that. So I'm actually going to use a tile generator. The reason for this is because so there's a color one and there's a grayscale. So actually, while we were on that, you kind of notice I've been working purely in grayscale, and that's like for now until we get to doing the second part of this video. Like we're going to stick to just using grayscale because it's a lot cheaper, quicker to work with, and it's just easier to kind of understand. So yeah, we're gonna drag this in, and you'll see that this has kind of like different inputs basically. So you can we're going to drag this shape into the first input, which is the pattern image, and then we're going to change the settings on this to generate the bricks basically. Yeah, so when I was making this brick pattern originally, like I had a sort of a couple of references. So I'm just gonna sort of pull those up now, because these are a lot of the, like when you were talking about sort of like decisions, artistic decisions and things, this is the sort of thing that I would like, this is the part that you kind of don't necessarily like get in sort of normal tutorials. That I just think it's important to understand like what my thinking is behind these when I'm doing this. So like the first part of it we just explained with the making the shape, this is about making like these, that's kind of informed from the reference. So like I've got a couple of, I'm just going to drag these over. So this is one of the main pieces of reference that I used to make the brick wall, and this is just a CG Texture is actually really good for this. So they have quite a lot of like sort of photo source textures obviously, and because of the way that they're taken, like you can tell a lot about the information of the actual texture, and it also really helps to understand like how you might lay out a tiling texture as well, because you've got like a lot of them on CG Textures tile, so you can go on there and just download a couple of images and sort of use those as photo source. So that's what I tend to do a lot. So I just grabbed, like this is one, I think that's one that tiles, this is just a general one, and then I just grabbed a couple of other brick walls, and I was actually thinking about doing it, I wanted to do like quite a plaster heavy one at one point, so I had a couple of these sort of images, and even sort of the like metal inside in actually, because the scene that I'm making, they have these kind of like big metal sort of like struts, and I want to like sort of build that into my texture as well at some point, so that kind of consideration as well. And I even was looking at some 3D reference as well, because some of the stuff from the order is really good, like these kind of, just the way that they've you know, the mortars interacting with the bricks themselves, and the way that plaster kind of comes across. So like that sort of stuff was really helpful, just as looking for reference and to see how that's been done. So yeah, I mean this is the main one that I was using anyway, so we'll just refer to that. But obviously, like now that I'm looking at that, that can kind of help me when I'm thinking about like how I'm going to actually generate the pattern itself. So this tile generator, the way that it works is it takes an input. So if you scroll all the way down, you'll see pattern type, this little drop down. You can basically choose from ones that are preset. So at the moment it's selecting brick, which is like the default one for the node basically. So you can choose different ones, like if you add, I mean like in discs and like a sort of various different patterns basically. But if you select the one at the top which says image input, that will take the image that you're like plugging into it. So the pattern image input, that's what that selects now. So you can see that it's basically populating my pattern that I've put in there, that square, like within the tile generator now. And because the tile generator's got quite a lot of settings, you can play with that until you get something that you're happy with. So one of the first things that I do is kind of just go from the top of the thing and work my way down pretty much. So while looking at the 2D view, because that's going to help me to inform what's actually going on. So probably start to like just play around with these settings until maybe I've got something that's like I'm happy with. So I just try to get the general number, something similar. I think in the reference it's like quite a lot, so I think I maybe went for like sort of like 20, maybe like 20 high and then maybe like 8 across or something like that. Something like that. Maybe I'll like, and the thing is, what's cool is I can come back and tweak this anyway, so I'll probably come back at some point and tweak this. The scale of them is like sort of, as you dial that up, the actual size of the like bricks is getting bigger, so you're getting like a smaller amount of like mortar between them. So yeah, you can just kind of play around with that until you get something. And then a lot of the rest of the stuff is all to do with giving it kind of variation. So the scale variation kind of like makes some of the bricks a little bit smaller and a bit bigger, and then you can sort of like vary that with the seed. And then like I tend to the offset as well, you can get some kind of interesting results with that. I would probably like randomize that a little bit, and just sort of, you know, like just see how that kind of starts to look. At this stage actually as well, I think it's kind of worth seeing it on the 3D thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug this in to the base color, and you'll start to see the normal maps actually applied to here. One of the things you can do as well is if you go into the settings for the base, you can dial the intensity of the normal map up, so we'll make that like really strong so we can just see what's going on. And even at this stage as well, like you can start to get that like parallax on. If you go into the materials and like dial that up, you can see that that's like actually coming through as like the input. So we just need to make sure that like the height map's actually coming through basically. So I'm just going to make sure that we're getting that. So I'm just going to plug, yeah, so you can see here actually this for some reason is working like it's plugged in the metallic when I dragged it in originally. So I'm just going to see if I can connect this back into there. There we go. So now we're getting what we should have been getting basically. So I mean that's probably quite strong. So I'm just going to like adjust that a little bit. But you can see already like we're kind of getting something that's kind of like resembling bricks, even just a little bit, like even they're sticking out like a lot, but it's kind of helping to see like what's actually going on with that like parallax basically. But I tend to find like the normal intensity thing, you can kind of like go back and tweak that, but I tend to keep the values like quite high anyway, just because you want when you're like to get all those like nice details to come through. It does really help to get that kind of strong normal map, I guess. So yeah, now I'm going to go back now basically and tweak this until I'm kind of happy with stuff. So you can also add variation in the bricks, like their values. So obviously if I dial this luminance variation up, like you can see that like if I'm looking in the 3D view, I'm getting like some of the bricks are sort of less strong and are sort of knocked back a little bit, which is nice because like they're not always going to be like perfectly in line in real life. So it's nice to get like that little bit of variation basically. And you can increase the contrast as well if you want with that too. Then in terms of rotation, because obviously if you look at this now, like if I increase the intensity, go back to the shape and increase the intensity of the gradient, you can see how that is kind of affecting the normal map. But if we look at it in the texture, you can see that all the gradients are sort of going from the bottom up, and I kind of want to avoid that. Like, I mean, it's okay, but it's not giving, like they're all, like you can actually see it if you look at it from on the top view a bit better, but they're all kind of pointing in the same direction, and I kind of want that variation but to be pointing differently. So this is where the rotation comes in, and there's sort of 4 different types in this one. One is like you can kind of rotate them how you want, which is not really going to help me. You can rotate them like fixed amounts, and then like this is basically this fixed rotation random is going to give me what I want, so I can just play around with that. And you can see now if you're looking in the texture view and also in the 3D view how that's actually kind of affecting the bricks. So now I'm going to go back, I'm going to dial this dial the intensity of the gradient down, because I want that effect but I want it to be like subtle. So just adding a gradient to it's going to give me like a little bit of variation but not like too much. I just want it to be, you know, kind of there but not too strong. So yeah, so now sort of continuing to sort of like work my way like sort of down. You could see here this is some of the stuff that's quite useful. You've got the different masks, so you can add like various sort of like, the random mask is really useful actually if you wanted to like knock back certain bricks and like leave other ones. So sometimes I like put a couple that I just don't, just so that it's like a little gap, and you can bring in some of the like mortar basically in there just to like bring it through. Like if you're going for a more like plastery feel, that would make more sense to bring some of them through and some of them not, which you can kind of come back and adjust this anyway. It's also quite good if you wanted to like build up other ones on top, like, and maybe have different variations. Like if I could use this, which I am gonna actually do that in a second, but I could like choose this random mask and then like blend over the top like another type of brick in that where that random mask is. So like if I had, I don't know, say like a different like smaller bricks in those ones, rather than, because you can see actually, we'll go back to this reference, you can see like sort of here there's like smaller bricks on one of the lines, and like some of them are like bigger bricks and some of them are smaller. So I want to bring that sort of feeling through. But I'm not going to use the random mask, but I'm going to sort of show how I might do that in a minute. So yeah, that's probably enough for now, and I might probably come back actually into like this is like the sort of first shape, so you kind of want to come back to this stuff anyway, and you'll tweak it as you go along. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this, and I'm actually just going to increase like the amount of bricks there is there, and then I want to start blending that like together with the other one. But like I'm going to blend this, but I kind of need like quite like a distinctive mask, because I'm going to want like them to come in, maybe like in that example obviously they're coming in like some of the rows. So if I reckon like the best way to do that is I could kind of sort of take this thing I've got here and go back to, instead of using the image input, we go back to square and take out some of the variation. We can just keep tweaking this basically until we get something. We'll leave that and like tweak these lines. You can see that it's sort of almost starting to get some sort of variation like in these lines here now already. So it's just a matter, I guess, of playing with this until you get sort of like what you want basically. So yeah, I'm just gonna sort of have a play around with that until I get something that I'm kind of happy with. So we'll just put this back to 1. So yeah, so now we've got kind of like, I guess, some lines which are representative of these, like the layout of these bricks. So I'm just gonna use a levels here to just take these so that it's gonna be like a kind of black and white basically mask, and it's just going to come through on some of them and not all of them, because then I don't want it to be like just completely, don't want it to come through on everything basically. So I'm just going to want it to come through on like a couple of these, and I can just play around until I got something like maybe I want it to come through on say like 3 or something like that. So yeah, you can see that's sort of working already. And so now I want to sort of shift this line here we've got like that's connected to the base material to my new input. So if I hold shift, I can select that, and that will now update to there. So yeah, now I'm getting that sort of like variation across those things. So if I just like completely, I'm just going to continue playing with like put another, maybe I'll go for sort of like a couple of levels. So like just if I crunch these values to like enough, and then I can do it again until I get something that like just tweaking really until I've got like something that's working basically. Yeah, I mean, I think that's working. I can then as well, what's cool is I can kind of go back and tweak how many bricks we're getting until we've got something a bit more close to the reference. But yeah, that's kind of, for me, that's sort of working now in terms of like, we're getting like quite a similar pattern to this now. You can kind of see like already. So I'd quite like as well, I wonder if there's a way I can rotate these a tad, like I just want the bricks to just shift like a tiny bit, like rotation. Let's try 1. Yeah, just because it's like, it's when they're all like really square, it just looks a little bit strange. So if they're like, you can see actually in the reference, like none of them are like really perfectly straight. Like it looks sort of like these ones, like some of them are like slightly off, a little bit sort of rotated and stuff like that. So yeah, that's looking a bit better now. So now I want to, I'm gonna sort of, I think I'm gonna take what I've got there and like add a little bit of variation to that now, just to give me like, to give me something that's gonna like, yeah, give me some sort of feeling of variation basically in the bricks. So one of the ways you can do that is with warping. So there's a node in the main one called directional warp, which is really nice. So what you can do is you can plug your shape in and then choose a noise. So I'm going to pick something like nice and soft, because you don't want to, if you add something too grungy, it's gonna, it's not going to look very good. So you like the best way to just sort of, now that I've got like this shape I'm kind of happy with, like the best way to describe how to like sort of continue working is to work from big to small. So you want to always, and this is true like of any texture really, it's like you're trying to get some sort of detail into as you go down, but like you start with the biggest details first. So like if I'm looking at the reference here, like I mean this is obviously like there's loads of little things, like there's loads of little dinks, there's like big scrapes, scratches, dust build up, all that sort of stuff, but you want to tackle the biggest things first. So the first thing is getting the bricks in the right place, obviously, and then you might start to tackle like some of these big, like there's some areas where like maybe it's like knocked out a little bit, like that's probably quite a big detail in comparison to like if you're going in and looking at like surface detail and surface noise. Like these big scratches are smaller than like the the big knockoffs, but then like the sort of little details, like these little like speckles and spots, those are all like small details. So you want to try and work from like big to small. So yeah, that's basically just a bit of advice really. But yeah, so I'm just going to take, that's why I'm saying you get these big sort of soft shapes to like start with, just because it's going to help you to go like from that big to small sort of thing. So if you can see now I'm basically this is warping everything that we've got in relation to that noise. So like where it's going to warp more in the like whiter areas in relation to the black basically. So like I tend to just have a play around with that, and then what I would probably do is like have another one and change the angle and just sort of warp that a little bit more and then blend them together, because you're going to get like doing that, you're just going to get like a little bit of variation basically. And if you can have a play around with different like blending nodes, but if it's warping it like not very much, then it's just going to give you like a little bit of variation basically. So yeah, I'm just going to have a play around with that. Maybe I'll use some different ones. I just play around really until you get something that's like you're kind of happy with. And this might work. Let's have a look. That's not what I want to do. I'm just trying to see sort of like how I can get some sort of I just want to, I think soft light's going to work quite well for this, but you can see how like this is kind of adding like these kind of like extra little lines. That's kind of like what I was intending, like it just to warp it a little bit different to give me that sort of like variation basically. So we'll just see. If also another thing, like you can work on this node, say I'm working on this node here, if I like double click on this one and then single click on that one, I can change the settings of that without it being too like, without going like not like sort of viewing the end result basically. So that's just worth knowing as well. So yeah, I mean that's kind of working. I think this one might be a little bit too strong actually. We'll just pull that back up. Yeah, it's just giving it like that little bit of variation you can kind of see. I'm going to sort of, at the moment, because I've been working at 256, I'm just going to make the graph a little bit bigger as well, so we'll be able to see like what it's actually looking like at like a higher resolution. So if we go up to 1024, that will give us a little bit more. Okay, so yeah, we're getting some like little like this kind of like double edge effect going on, which I kind of like, because I'm gonna get, I mean like obviously on its own it looks a bit strange, but I'm gonna get like away. I'm gonna sort of erode that so that like and knock it back. So that'll just give me another area to kind of work on. Like it's just gonna give you that extra layer to push back basically. So yeah, now I'm just going to go back and I'm going to tweak the variation, I think, because I think it's a little bit, like, it's kind of a little bit too strong, so I want to just turn it down a little bit, so we've not got so many of these shapes being sort of like, maybe actually let's undo that. I'll tell you what might be better actually, let's just see what happens when we tweak this gradient. Yeah, that's what I think. The gradient's kind of like throwing it a little bit. I want it in there but not like as much. So like when I had it sort of 0.5 before, you can see it's quite strong. I want to go for maybe like 1.15 or something like that. It's enough but like not too much. So yeah, that feels better to me already. Cool, right, so I'll just save that. So then the next sort of stage, so I've added kind of like a bit of variation and I've got the general brick pattern. Now I want to look at a node called slope blur, and slope blur is really good. Basically what it does is it takes your shape, so you plug in your shape and then a noise, and then it will blur the edges of like that basically. So it looks horrendous when you first plug it in because it's not, for some reason it seems to be, it's like set really high by default. So you can basically see it sort of starts to blur like the edges based on the noise of those things. So it's taking like the sort of slope intensity basically and blurring that. And then you have a couple of ways of like adding those to the model. So like to the texture. So you can actually choose like how it's blending. So like a max or minimum blend will obviously blend like off of the top values or the bottom values basically. So it's not like it's coming out. So it's giving you that when you're sort of modeling in 3D, you're always adding things like bevels to kind of like, if you're baking something into a surface, to give it that like surface area so that it picks it up in the actual model. So we're basically getting that effect by doing that. So we'll just like have a play around with this and see what sort of effects you can get. So you can see if I go for the minimum node, it's kind of blending into the bricks, whereas if I go for max, it's like blending out. So because I'm trying to knock back the bricks, I'm going to choose minimum, and then I'm just going to like change the intensity, so we've got something like that maybe. You can see that's starting to like knock back the shapes of the bricks a little bit and give us a little bit of variation, which is great. So now I'm just going to go with the same thing now, but just sort of work my way down with smaller noises. So I'm just going to take the exact same thing, copy and paste it, and then I'm going to have in the library, I'm going to go back to these Perlin noises, and I'm going to find a smaller one because they've got I think it's this Perlin noise zoom actually it allows you, this one's really good, it's the same kind of noise but it allows you to zoom the noise in further. So if we're looking at this now, this is actually adding like variation, but I can dial the like size of this down. So as I dial this, it's like tiling more basically. So obviously that's like adding like not quite the effect we want, but it's giving that like knocked off sort of feeling. So I can tweak that and just like until we get something like that's working basically. And you can see it's adding like these little kind of the details that I kind of pointed out basically, like that area where it's kind of just like knocking it off, like knocking it back a little bit. And then I can go back as well now, and if I wanted to tweak say like the size of these actually, so like that's going to give me the scale is going to give me like how close they are to each other, so I can keep like tweaking that until you see how it's kind of, when they start to overlap like that as well. There's another thing that's quite useful is at the bottom of this node in the blending modes you can add like max, and it will start to, instead of, you can see the difference there basically, if you had it on add, they'll sort of like overlay like they would blending mode, whereas max will just kind of, you know, like their values are going to stay the same basically. So that's something that's worth like playing around with as well, if you want, like depending on what effect you want. So I'm just going to go for something like 1.2 maybe, yeah, that's kind of okay. and I can do the same for the small ones, but I'm kind of tempted to leave those just because they're small, how they are. So yeah, and then I'm just gonna have a sort of play around with this until I get something like that's working. I don't want it to be like too strong, so maybe like 0.12 would be enough. Yeah, I mean, I think that's working. That's giving me enough variation. So now I'm going to have a play around with like giving some more variation with some different nodes actually. So one of the like nodes, what I'm actually going to do at this stage is I'm just going to put these nodes, because like, I want my noises to be like in a place where they're like easy to understand. So I'm just going to add a frame around these and call it like noises, just so I know like what I'm doing and where I am, and like keeping it organized basically. And then I may like come and like think of a name to put for these things later as well. It's just nice to keep everything like organized and straight and like easy to understand. Like if somebody else was to come look at this, then they know like the flow of the graph and like generally how to use where it's going and stuff like that. So now I'm gonna copy another one of these and go back into the library now and have a look. So one of the ones that I tend to use was the cells pattern is really good. So actually this is cool, good point. So now I've got this noise, I can just drag this around here and it can still continue to work in the same way. So I quite like this. Basically is quite good for adding like kind of like sort of weird variation, because it's got these kind of, it's a little bit more banded, so it will just, it's not like a big soft noise, it's got this sort of variation. So when you play around with the intensity, it's kind of giving this sort of, you know, like weird sort of pattern to it, which will just like give nice variation to the brick basically. So it's one of those things where you end up like experimenting a bit and playing until you get something like that you're happy with basically. And so like I'm actually going to I'm going to invert this and see what variation that gives me in comparison to what I had before. So it's just giving me something like just a different bit, like different variation basically. So yeah, that's kind of nice. Like it's just giving like little knocks and dinks and things to the actual. And I kind of like the way it's kind of cutting across the bricks as well a little bit, because you could kind of see that actually in the reference. Like there's some areas where like you've got these kind of like little cuts across, like, and you can kind of see how that would be affecting this basically already. It's like it's feeling like that kind of same brick already. So that, yeah, that's great. So I'm pretty happy with that actually. I'm just going to continue. So now I quite like to add a little bit of, I don't know, maybe I'm adding like a little bit of noise to the brick. So I'm just going to have a bit of an experiment with, like maybe actually I want to kind of blend in something that's a little bit noisy. So if I take, because the cell pattern is actually really good, so I'm just going to use something here. Let's have a play around. So if we go for like clouds and see what this kind of effect does. So there's kind of like, you can see it sort of like breaks up into some sort of like, it kind of feels like it's quite sort of rocky, which is sort of the thing. I mean, I could get something similar with some of the noises, I'm sure, but while this is kind of like there, it makes sense to use it. So I'm going to sort of blend that over the top, I think, and sort of see, you know, what. Let's just switch these around. So yeah, that was just X as well to do that. So yes, you see I'm sort of like bringing in that noise now over the brick. Just want to see what that kind of effect is giving me. That's making it feel kind of nice, like a nice effect to the actual bricks themselves. So now I feel like the bricks there, because this is actually, so if we look at this before and after, this is knocking back or feels like anyway, like it's knocking back the bricks a little bit. So I want to go back now and like dial back that variation just a tad, so that it's not so strong, and then like some of the bricks will start to pop through a little bit more. It's just a case of going back, like once you know like what everything does, you can kind of just go back and like tweak. So that's, yeah, that's a bit better. I'm it's getting a nicer feeling now. Just because it felt like it was losing some of the bricks a little bit too much, and I just wanted to get that. Like even in this reference, like there's a few that have like stick out a little bit more. You can kind of tell actually by the shadows, but they're not like going. The mortar's not kind of like going over them or anything yet. So I kind of want to keep that feeling. So yeah, I'm kind of happy with how that's working. So we'll just save that now. Let's have a look at like. So now I kind of want to add maybe just like a little bit more like smaller variation as well, like to the edges, because I still feel a little bit rounded. So we take the slope blur again and just start. We'll use like, let's try with the clouds one that we had as well and see what sort of effect we can get with that. So that, yeah, that's just the way that sort of breaks stuff up a little bit. Like you don't want to go too strong with, like, this is the thing, it's like subtlety with these things is kind of key. You could just see in the normal map how it's kind of breaking up the edges just a little bit, which is feeling good, feels nice. So yeah, a lot of textures actually that I end up making, like a lot of the process is kind of similar. You find the sort of initial shape, whether or not, like if it's whatever it is, if it's like rocks or it's bricks or it's concrete or whatever, you start with something, a simple shape. You don't always bring in patterns, but like sometimes you might bring in a pattern, and then you go through this process of like working from like really big details down like to small details basically, until you get something that's just like you're happy with pretty much. And you can just tweak until you get something really good, I guess. So I'm gonna have a play around with some other noises as well now, because it's just a case of like experimenting till you get something that you like. So another one that I really like is the moisture noise. It's got some like really nice details in it. So I'm just gonna see what this looks like in isolation. So you can get some like really nice details of the moisture noise that I kind of like. You want to try and avoid going like a little bit too noisy though, so you just have to play around until you've got like something that's just breaking stuff up, but there's not like too much noise, I guess. So yeah, something like that's definitely working. So now I'm going to sort of have a look. So in the reference, so I think this is starting to feel quite nice. In the reference, it's got like these kind of like little dinks and little details and like scratches and things. So I'm gonna have a play around with like adding some of that stuff and just seeing what I can get. I mean, there's a kind of anyway, there's like multiple ways to do this, but I'm just gonna sort of work in this area here and do something like what I quite like to do is, if I'm doing like little details, is to start with some sort of like noise, like a dirt or something. So like dirt is quite good because it's got all these kind of like nice variations in it, and then splatter, which is like a separate node. You can plug stuff in to here and get like some nice variations and like add disorder to it basically, and rotation and stuff, like until you get something like that you like basically. So I just end up playing around with this until I get something that I like. So the way that the splatter node works is it takes whatever the input is and then just kind of tiles it with all these kind of parameters. So you can change like how much it's tiling. So I'm going to like dial this grid. The grid number kind of controls that. These, if I turn these down, you can kind of see what they're doing. So these are kind of like overlaid over the top of each other, so that if you turn them down, you can see they're like it's kind of like placing those things, and then I can change the scale of those things and then rotate them randomly as well, like that you can see as you move it, like how it's kind of overlaying over the top of each other. It's like a clone stamp tool or something. It's sort of doing that. So there's various patterns and disorder. You can add disorder and variation to things, and just doing that can give some like nice kind of effects. And then, so what I want to do at this stage now is I could kind of what I could do at this sort of stage is maybe like I could level it. If I leveled this, I'd get I could sort of like drag the values down until I got like something that I liked, like some sort of, you see how that's just like some sort of variation there. One of the things I really like to do actually, which is something I learned recently, was to use the gradient map, because you can basically add values to stuff. Like I can add new values to this, like if I change this to grayscale, I can add new values to something existing, and it will give me like sort of a completely new version of that texture. And by doing that, you get like, you can play around with the settings until you get something like completely different to what you had basically. And it's just nice to be able to sort of do that sort of stuff. So I mean I'm just experimenting at the moment anyway, but yeah, I mean I don't want this to be, I kind of don't want this to be too like too sort of like harsh, so I'm gonna play around with like blurring it a little bit, and then I may even give it a bit of like I'll give it a bit of a warp as well, and I'll like warp it with something. Let's try maybe warping it with this, just to give it like just a little bit of like those little bits of variations, and maybe like I'll level this. This is all kind of just a bit like, you do find you just experiment a little bit until you get something that you're sort of happy with, because I want to add these details, but I kind of want them to be really sort of like varied. And although like that looks horrendous in there, when you start to level it, it just gives you these kind of like randomized kind of like details that you can just sort of, that you can just kind of like level out until you've got something like nice. So yeah, something like this might work. So now I've got this, what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to blend. I'm just going to copy this blend node, and I'm going to blend the two together basically. And what I may have to do actually at this stage is, because I want these values to be like, I want them to actually like take away from the mod, like from the thing, whereas that you can see at the moment like this is actually just like adding. So I'm going to have to invert. So if I just invert grayscale, and then I'm going to get like the, instead of it being like they're going to be like the recesses basically, rather than, you see that now it's like knocking them back. So if we view that in the 3D view, you can see we're starting to get these little like dinks and little details actually adding on top. I mean, they're a little bit too strong, so what I'd probably do is like dial them down a little bit until, maybe just go down until like, I reckon maybe like 0.5 would probably be enough actually. So that's just like knocking back, it's just giving these like little surface details basically to that. So yeah, I think that's working quite well. So now what I kind of want to do is I want to like add some sort of like mortar like behind. I'm just going to do that, I think, because it will help me to visualize what's going on sort of with the bricks. So all I really want to do is just add like some sort of noise, and I think the moisture noise is quite good for making some sort of like dirt behind. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to level it and blend it, just for now. I mean, I may come back and tweak this dirt so that it's a little bit more detailed, but I just want something there. So something that, like the histograms are something that we haven't touched on yet, but basically they're like the equivalent of like different levels basically. And the histogram range is very similar to sort of like a brightness and contrast, but it gives me, it's nice because you can kind of just pull where you want the values to actually be quite easily, like a sort of so like it just seems to work better for me than levels. Like I just feel like I get more control with that. So now I'm going to blend like these two together, and we'll see how this works. But so what I'm going to use actually is I'm going to use the blending mode max lighten. So what that's going to do is it's going to blend this, because this is a dark value, it's going to blend that in the black areas. So at the moment I'm going to have to, this is why I've got this histogram range in, because I can drop the value until it's like behind just on the black areas basically. So if if I drop that in now, you can see how that's kind of starting to come through. So if as I drop this value here, like it's only going to come through on those values, and I can probably add more like contrast in there as well, like with levels as well, just to get like, so I don't, at this stage I don't really want it to be too sort of detailed. I guess I just, something like that. I mean, that's working fine for now, just to see like what's going on. I just want something behind there so I can just visualize like what's going on, and I can work, I mean I can work on that like coming through a little bit more and stuff later on, but just for now, I think that will work just fine. So yeah, right, so now I've kind of done that. What I want to look at now is like adding some cracks, like variation kind of cracks over the top of the bricks as well, to give me something like that's going to work like individual details basically. So I'm just going to shift all of this stuff like over here a little bit, and then I'm going to work on kind of cracks here. So the cells that we sort of had before, they are kind of like the perfect way to make cracks, because they're like this cellular pattern that's kind of like going to work well. So one of the nodes that I'm going to use is that edge detect, because that, and for some reason like edge detect is really good, but it seems to only work like, it doesn't seem to work very well like at smaller sizes, so you just have to be a bit like kind of careful with that, I guess. So yeah, I'm just gonna dial this up, have a play around with this until I get something that I like. Yeah, because it's just one of those things that's not to, edge detect doesn't seem to work particularly well at like the smaller resolutions basically. So let's just dial this up a little bit. There we go, that's what I wanted. So yeah, this is quite nice because it's got this sort of cellular feel to it. So what it's doing is it's taking this and it's finding sort of like the darker and lighter areas, and then it's making an edge for those, and then like as you like you can round those edges, and it adds these kind of little bits sort of like where it sort of rounds, and then yeah, so you can just basically, it's kind of like sort of feels like a bit like a honeycomb kind of pattern, but as I change this like scale, hopefully this will update with like the edge detect basically. So let's just see if I can dial that back down to 1024, and it should still work hopefully. Yeah, there we go, that's better, that's working now. Okay, so now I'm just gonna like blur again a little bit, because I don't want them to be too harsh, and then I'm gonna like level again, so we can get, just, it gives you that little bit of variation then, doesn't it, like just to make them kind of bit thinner and, you know, a bit more feeling like cracks basically. So now I'm gonna slope blur these and get some sort of like, so basically we're working the same way. Like I want to add these cracks over the top, so I'm gonna blend them in like straight like over here, and then I'm gonna work on that until I'm like happy with how that's actually working. So you can see like the cracks are over the top now, just because I mean like obviously doesn't look that good, but what I want to do is just work on the slope blur in with it like in context basically. So I'm just going to put slope blur in. Okay, so always turn up the samples as well. That just it's like the quality basically of the slope blur. So in this scenario, actually, I kind of feel like I want to go maybe like with something like this to start with, and then maybe I go like, it's just, again, it's like playing around until you get something that you like. That's not going to work too well. I'm I'm just trying to knock back the edges of the cracks a little bit. And maybe we sort of we'll just go for like we'll warp it a little bit as well, I think, because hopefully that will give me a little bit more variation. I just tend to use the slope layers and the warps until I get something like that sort of works well. That's too extreme. I mean, it's starting to get there. We'll just keep sort of playing around until we get something. I want to add a little bit more variation into that. It's a little bit too strong, I think. Just going to start adding like disorder to this now. Then what I want to do actually is I want to blend this. I want to like use a mask to blend this, so it's not kind of blending on everything. So it's just kind of coming through on some of the bricks and not everything. So we'll blend. Maybe it can come through on some of the higher bricks potentially. So we'll just use this kind of mask. Again, it's just like playing around and experimenting until you get something that you want, like, and that you're happy with. So I want like the cracks, but I don't want them to be like too extreme, and I don't want them to come through on like too many bricks. That's sort of working, but it's adding like nice detail variations as well, like these sort of like little variants. I think that's working quite well. I'm gonna go back now actually and increase the spacing between the things. I always find, like I always do this, I'll spend ages like just tweaking like this. That's too much. The spacing between the bricks, because I never get that bit like until I'm like happy with that. Like it takes ages for me to get that bit right. And the same with the actually it's very much the same with the variation as well, because I like to have a good balance. Like I want it to be varied but not too much. So I'm gonna have a play around with the scale of the height map as well now, so we can just go for 0.4, just so I can see what's like the details a bit better. Yeah, I mean I'm pretty happy with that. I'm just gonna tweak these things, these little. Might add another. Let's go for another warp actually in this, with this maybe some smaller details there. Let's try this one. Go a different direction as well. 10 maybe. Yeah, that's working quite well. Yeah, and then I guess you can sort of always go back anyway and tweak the details until you're happy, basically. It's good to like see what it looks at different sizes as well, like different resolutions. Like yeah, I'm pretty happy with how that's looking. So yeah, so I think that's enough, like concluding wise for the brick. So I'm gonna sort of leave this here, I think, And so what I'm probably going to do for the next tutorial is I'm going to where the sort of because the diffuse and the roughness and stuff, they don't take too long, so that the lesson's a little bit longer and that it's a bit more balanced, I'm going to have a look at like making the mortar and the bricks interact better in the next episode as at the start, and then I'll add the colour I think in the last part. But yeah, that kind of like concludes like the sort of like how I would approach doing, you know, a height map. It like I said before, just starting with like your initial shape and sort of like adding getting the pattern like working correctly and blending together different things, like different versions if you want to do that. Like just looking at the reference is the main thing, and then once you've kind of got to a stage where you're happy, like here obviously where we've sort of started to blend things together, then you can kind of address like adding those little details. So you go over all your slope layers until you get to a stage where you're happy, and then you could look at blending like different details in. So like I added in, you know, the little kind of dinks and scratches and stuff as like separate things, separate areas. So yeah, that basically concludes that. So in terms of homework for this episode, my sort of general homework was basically just to kind of recreate your own version of the bricks. Like it's like I said, the best thing to do is to take a reference image, like even if it's one of CD Textures or one that you've taken yourself or whatever, and try and recreate like to your best ability that basically, until you've got something that you're happy with. And then if you want to take it further, like if you didn't want to do bricks, if you wanted to do tiles, or if you want to like, you know, go any further, like go into more detail or anything like that, then obviously feel free to do that. That's like totally up to you. But yeah, so that I look forward to sort of like seeing what you guys come up with and giving some feedback and critique on that. So yeah, okay, till sort of the next episode, I shall see you in the next one. Cheers.